You are listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding. Between 2 and 6% of people have hoarding disorder, yet very few of us talk about it. Learn about the condition from me, somebody who has it, as well as academics, therapists and other experts I interview. Find out how to support the podcast at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support. Finally, I am not a doctor, I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. Hey, how are you? I'm doing fine, although it's like 1:30 in the afternoon and it's somehow dark outside. I miss the sun already, not that we got a load of it this summer, but can you tell I hate winter? It's not even winter yet, but I'm already in full hating winter mode. But I'm alright.
It's time for the pointless thing I found this week.
This week I found a bank card. Handy, you might think. No, this was a bank card from 2007, which is 17 years ago. That's not ideal, is it? I mean, I chopped it up. I always chop up bank cards, but to be honest, I think I could have put it straight in the hands of a scammer and they wouldn't have been able to do anything with it. But I did chop it up and it went in the bin. Today I'm looking at a decluttering dilemma that a lot of us have. I'm going to look at 2 strategies for dealing with hard tasks, and they are opposite strategies. And I'm going to look at what the best approach is when we are dehoarding. Do we swallow the frog, which I will explain if that's not a phrase you've heard before, or do we save the worst till last? And I'm going to look at them in terms of the psychology of things like what they do to us in terms of mental barriers and procrastination and overwhelm and all of those things that are really familiar to any of us who are trying to dehoard. Because when we are dehoarding a home, it's kind of overwhelming and there's a lot of it to do. And so the more we can set ourselves up for success, the less disheartened we'll get and the more progress we can make. Because how much progress we're making at any given time can influence what we do tomorrow, what we do the day after, what we do next month. Because if we're making little progress and we feel demoralised, that doesn't make us want to pick up the baton again tomorrow and do more, does it? And in particular, if we've got a lot to do, we want to be efficient as best we can. We want to make actual progress. We want to see that needle moving. And so I'm going to look into these 2 competing approaches to achieving tasks like decluttering and dehoarding. And I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of each and when each might be more suitable. So, first of all, swallowing the frog. This is a phrase I had never heard until I got into work one morning and was talking to a colleague, and we were talking about what we had to do that day, and I mentioned a particular task that I wasn't really looking forward to, and then we carried on chatting, and then as we were getting down to work, she said, "So, are you going to swallow the frog?" And I wondered if I was having an auditory processing disorder moment. Am I going to swallow the frog? What is she talking about? What could she have possibly said? But it's a thing, and what swallowing the frog means is starting with the worst task, starting with the task you're dreading, starting with the task you really don't want to do. And it comes from a quote from Mark Twain, who said, "Eat a live frog first thing in the morning, and nothing worse will happen to you for the rest of the day." And yeah, that is true. If you swallow a live frog first thing in the morning, you've got the worst task done and you're kind of free to get on with the rest of your day in relative ease. It makes sense, gross as it is. That idea of doing the worst thing and then making everything else less daunting is an appealing one, and it's used, the phrase, the metaphor swallowing the frog is used as a way to describe kind of facing your fears or doing the thing you're dreading head on, going straight into the hard thing and then coasting for the rest of the day. So in terms of the benefits of swallowing the frog, a clear one is that you get a sense of accomplishment early on in your day. And that's nice. That feels good. If by 8:05 you can already feel like you've achieved something, you're going well. That's a good start to any day. And that can power you on, that sense of success, that sense of being a capable person. And that can increase your motivation and it can increase your productivity. And when I say productivity, I'm talking in terms of dehoarding. So in terms of what you achieve, basically. I know that's not the original meaning of productivity, but I'm thinking in terms of like your industriousness and your effort with dehoarding. Another reason that swallowing the frog is a good way to approach dehoarding is because often the thing you're dreading, the task you've been putting off, the worst task, is that way because it's causing you the most stress or the most discomfort or the most misery. So resolving that task resolves a source of stress or discomfort or misery, gets it out of the way. If you've got a spillage that you're dreading cleaning up and then you clean it up, not only do you not have that spillage anymore, but that's something less to worry about. It's something less to weigh on your mind. So you've got the sense of accomplishment, but you've also got some relief from the stress or the discomfort or the misery that specific task was causing you. Your stress can also be relieved with the swallowing the frog approach, just because whatever comes next, you know you've done the worst thing. So your nervous system can settle a bit. Say, okay, I'm not relishing the tasks of the rest of the day, but the worst is over. And it all creates momentum, which enables you to carry on and do more. Everything else feels easier because the gross task or the physically demanding task or the stressful task is done. So it's a bit of a snowball effect of success. However, swallowing the frog has its drawbacks as well as its benefits. When I interviewed Casey Davis on this podcast, which I will link to in the show notes at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk, she said that she doesn't go with the swallowing the frog method so much herself because for her, if the worst task is first, she will delay and delay and delay and delay and not get anything done. It's the worst task. She doesn't want to do it. She doesn't want to launch into her care tasks because the first one is so off-putting. So that is one of the drawbacks. If the worst task is the first on your list, it can prevent you from starting at all. If you feel intimidated by it, if you are not motivated because you've got to do the really overwhelming, intimidating thing, you might end up doing nothing at all. If the frog is too big, too scary, that can be a recipe for procrastination. Another reason swallowing the frog can be a tricky one is that it carries the potential that you will burn out early. You'll burn out quickly. You're doing the hardest thing first. And so that can be whether physically exhausting, emotionally exhausting, and that can leave you less motivated or less able to do more, especially if that task is somehow worse than you're anticipating or it takes longer than you're anticipating. There is the danger with this approach that you just flop at the end and say no more. Breaks and pacing yourself can help with this, but it's something to still be aware of. Another potential risk area with swallowing the frog is that while it can be really encouraging, it also can carry the risk of discouragement if it's harder than you expect, if it takes ages, if it's exhausting. You might feel like you're not making enough progress. I only had one thing to do and I couldn't even do that. And that can take away your motivation. It can lead you to feel like this is pointless and just be demoralizing. And again, breaking tasks down into smaller chunks, pacing yourself, breaks, all of those things can help with that, but it's a risk to be aware of. So how do we apply swallowing the frog to our dehoarding work? The first is to identify what the frog is. What's your frog today? Is it something that's been bugging you for weeks and that you've not quite tackled yet? Is it something urgent, like you've got a leak and you need to clear space? Is it something gross that's sticky or wet and you have to clear it up? Is it something you know is going to take an emotional toll, like going through nostalgic items? I think often we know what our frog is. Often we don't want to admit it because then we'd have to actually do it. But if you can identify what your frog is, that's a great place to start. And then just because you're swallowing the frog doesn't mean you have to do it all in one go without stopping, because the frog, by definition, can be a really overwhelming one. This is an ideal time to break it down into steps. What are the steps I need to achieve to swallow this frog? So your first step might just be gathering together the things you'll need to deal with it, which might be rubbish bags, it might be cleaning products, it might be putting your shoes on because you know you'll have to take something out in order to successfully swallow this frog. And work out what the different steps might be, and then pace yourself. Don't feel you have to do it without stopping. Don't feel you have to do it without breaking it down into more manageable chunks. Swallowing the frog is about doing that first. It's not about burning yourself out to achieve a giant thing. And if breaking it down feels overwhelming, don't try and plan all the steps. Just say, okay, my task is this. What might the first step be? And do that. And then say, okay, what might the next step be? And do that. Experimenting. You don't have to plan perfectly in advance. You can work it out as you go. I have a growing appreciation for working it out as I go. Something I could never do. And now I've had to embrace. And I've had to embrace that as a way to tackle dehoarding. But what I'm finding is that I'm able to apply it now to other areas of my life. If I need to cook and I've got disparate ingredients, I approach it with, okay, I'm sure I can work out a way to make this tasty, rather than having to find the perfect recipe on the internet that includes them all, but nothing I don't have in stock, and all of that stuff. I work it out. And if it turns out that this flavour of marinated tofu doesn't go brilliantly with that flavour of pasta sauce, then I know for next time. That's what I cooked the other day, by the way. It worked really well. I would never have 3 years ago picked up those ingredients and just tried. I would have had to go for either a tried and tested thing I'd cooked many times before, or I would have to find a whole new recipe when I'm perfectly capable of cooking all the parts individually. And the result is my diet is more varied than ever. And all of that is because I realised that one of the things really slowing me down when I was trying to dehoard was this idea that I had to come up with a complete plan in advance of exactly how it would go. And then if it didn't go quite perfectly, I would scrap it all and have to start again. And I was really tying myself up in knots. And I had to force myself to start a task not knowing what might come next, not knowing exactly how it would play out. And that was frightening. And then it was liberating. And then I started applying it to other parts of my life. And so when you're breaking down the frog into smaller parts, that doesn't mean you have to have the perfect course of action ready in your head before you go. It means either you think you've got the steps, but you're willing to wiggle if they don't quite work out, or you start with a step or 2 steps and work it out from there. And in order to avoid the risk of burnout that can come with swallowing the frog, I'm looking forward to never having to say swallow the frog again once this episode is done. It's quite unpleasant, isn't it? But in terms of avoiding the risk of burnout, breaks are your friend. You don't have to do 3 solid hours without looking up. Do 20 minutes, then have a stretch and get a glass of water, and do another 20 minutes. Break it down and listen to your body. Don't use that as permission to go, oh, I feel a bit tired, I'd better stop. But also do use it as permission to stop if it really is too much. Pushing yourself is good to a degree, but pushing yourself relentlessly is what burns people out. Because, as I have said 1,000 times and will say 1,000 times more, this is a marathon and it's not a sprint, and we're working on it. So let's look now at the idea of saving the worst task till the end. If you want to help to support this independent podcast that is dedicated to spreading awareness and understanding of hoarding disorder and is really unique in what it offers, please do subscribe to the podcast to make sure you don't miss any future episodes. Leave a review and share it with your friends or anyone who might be interested. It all helps. Find out how to offer support at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support. So this is obviously the opposite of swallowing the frog. It's knowing what maybe the hardest task is, or the most unpleasant task, or the one we're most daunted by, putting that on your mental schedule for the end, and starting with easier things, easing yourself in with the tasks you feel confident you can manage, and building momentum more gradually. And the benefits of this more gradual momentum are that it can reduce the risk of overwhelm, because you're building up your confidence, you're strengthening that dehoarding muscle as you go, and you get those small wins that can power you on and give you the sense that, okay, maybe I can build up to the scary thing. Maybe I can do the bigger task because I've proven already today that I could do those 4 smaller tasks. Whereas swallowing the frog gives you a big burst of a sense of success and motivation at the start of the day, saving the worst task till the end and starting with easier ones gives you a different sense of motivation and achievement and accomplishment, because it's more steady, it's more step by step. And you can often, with smaller tasks, see small but immediate progress. And that as well is a motivator to keep going. And with those quick wins, if you're a list person, and if you like crossing things off your list, if you're one of my people, you get to cross things off really early. You don't have to achieve a giant thing before you can cross something off the list. And if you are the kind of person that gets motivated by crossing something off a list, that's not to be sniffed at. The steady kind of pace you might need to keep doing this in the long term is also often easier to achieve when you start with easier tasks. And there's less resistance, there's less internal emotional resistance when you are starting with more gradual easing in. And that lack of resistance can be invaluable, especially if you're trying to get into a rhythm, trying to get into a pattern of dehoarding. And another benefit of saving the worst till the last is a point that Casey made when she was saying why she didn't swallow the frog. And that was that if you start more gradual and build up to the worst task, then even if you get to the worst task and you cannot face it, you have at least achieved everything else. Even if you never make it to that worst task, some tasks are completed. So you have made progress. Things are less cluttered. You've made some decisions. You've proved to yourself that you can do it. The drawbacks of leaving the worst till the last are, one is related to that last point, which is that it kind of enables you to continually avoid that worst task, achieve everything else, and shunt the worst task till the next day, and then do that again the next day and the next day, forever leaving that task undone. And that can be a form of procrastination. You're still achieving something, but the most urgent thing or the most pressing thing or the thing that's causing you the worst stress continues causing you the worst stress because you're still not doing it. Another drawback is that you might be doing the easiest task, but with a sense of constant looming doom because you know what's coming. You might spend the day with the kind of lingering anxiety because you know the biggest task is still to be done, the worst task is still to be done. And that might get in the way of you feeling that sense of achievement from even the smaller tasks. And all of this can mean that there's a risk of not finishing what you've started. There's a risk of achieving the small things and having kind of trained yourself over time to continually not do the big thing. And that's not the approach you want to have when you're tackling a task as big as dehoarding. Now, ways that you can apply saving the worst task till the end when you are dehoarding include start with the easy bits. Start with something you feel reasonably confident you can tackle. This might be something you've found easy before. It might be something that you know you don't have a particular problem with. Maybe you're fine getting rid of clothes. Maybe you're most of the way there with your kitchen drawers. Starting where you're comfortable and building up confidence and strengthening that dehoarding muscle are really effective when you're dehoarding. I've said before that there are times I open up a box and see it's lots of nostalgic things and I just think it's not the time. I know that's probably my hardest kind of thing to sort through. And because there is plenty else I can be getting on with, there are many other boxes. It's okay to shunt that task. I have to be aware, though, that in theory at least, this could result in the final hurdle of my dehoarding journey being all of the worst, hardest things. But by then, I will have built that muscle and that confidence and that experience that I'm hoping will help me. And I think one way to avoid using this approach and finding that you're never getting to the hard task is to start with tasks that are harder, but not the hardest. So your worst task at the end of today is a quite hard task, and your worst task at the end of tomorrow is quite hard. But then as you get that experience and that practice, you can then have a harder task at the end of the day. And then as you build that confidence, you can build up to having the hardest tasks at the end of the day over time. So I wanted to also go into real world applications for both of these approaches and look at which tasks might be best suited to which, because you don't have to say, from now on, I'm going to swallow the frog every day for the rest of my life. It doesn't have to work like that. You can pick and choose. You can experiment and test. So examples of times that swallowing the frog might be the best approach is when something is really negatively affecting your daily life. If you can't access the cooker, if you can't use the bath, In those kind of cases, swallowing the frog can be the best approach, because tackling that really hard but important task will make a material difference to your daily life. It will make your home more functional and have an immediate positive effect on your life. And same if there is clutter or stuff that is causing you particular stress. If every time you walk into your home, you have to climb over a pile of mail that you haven't opened, that can be a really good time to swallow the frog. You might be scared of dealing with the mail, you might be avoidant, you might be scared of what the letters say, but throw yourself into it first. And again, it will make a real life difference to your levels of frustration and annoyance and impairment daily. And the third time when swallowing the frog can be the best approach is when you need a big win. You don't need a quick win, you need something significant, whether that's to prove to yourself that you can do it, whether it is to prove to somebody else that you can do it. Tackling that worst area or the hardest area can be the boost, the psychological confidence boost that you need, that makes you look at the rest of your home and go, I've got this. I've got this. If I can do that, I can certainly do this. And sometimes when it might be best to save the worst till the last, one is if you feel like you need to build confidence in dehoarding. If you're feeling very overwhelmed, if you're very anxious, if you haven't tried to tackle anything before and you're starting from scratch, then beginning by easing yourself in with easier tasks can help you to strengthen that muscle, to prove to yourself that you can work it out, you can do it. Another time, like in my experience, for those things that you know will trip you up, but may not make that much visible difference, like a box of old photos. If it makes sense to you to say, that is not something I can deal with right now, but there are other things I can deal with that will be less emotionally charged, then I can practice with those other things and build up, prepare myself mentally for the box of photos or the box of letters or the bag of your child's baby clothes. And a third time saving the worst till the last can be the best approach, is if you are exhausted, if you're low on spoons, if you're low on the will to succeed, if you've got limited time or limited energy, dealing with a smaller, more manageable task means you can still make progress, even if you don't get to the scary one at the end of the day. So I would definitely say that for most people, using both of those approaches on different days can be the most effective strategy. Think about the situation you're in. Think about how emotionally resilient you are feeling on the day. Think about the tasks you want to achieve and ask yourself, okay, which will be most effective for me today? Is today a swallowing the frog day, or is today a more gradual saving the worst till the last day? Also, think about your personality. Think about what motivates you, what keeps you going. Are you someone who tends to feel better if they get the worst task out of the way early on? Or are you somebody who would never start if that was the case? Are you somebody who gets more of a sense of achievement through a series of small successes than you are from one big one? Think about what motivates you, even if you haven't done much dehoarding before or you're not sure. Think about that in other areas of your life. What motivates you and keeps you going? What kind of approach to difficult tasks works for you at work or in relationships? And think about the task itself. Some tasks will be more suited to a swallowing the frog approach. Others will be more suited to a gradual build-up. Experiment. You don't have to go in knowing what the perfect approach is. Give it a try. As Jan would say, be curious. Go into it and say, okay, I wonder what's going to happen if I do this. And make a note, make a mental note, or indeed a note on paper. When you try each one, how does that feel for you? Does that feel like you're starting the day strong and you're raring to go for the rest of the day when you swallow the frog? Or if you save the worst till the last, does it feel like you're building confidence as you go? Or does it just feel like you're spending the whole day dreading what's coming? Your goal is not to decide on one of these and use it for the rest of your life. Your goal is to know that these are two of the options and then to try them out and then observe how they go. And you might make changes, you might adapt, you might think, okay, a bit of this, a bit of that. You'll learn and you can refine. Ultimately, your goal is to make progress. Which of those approaches helps you make the most progress in each situation? Because we're all learning. We're all making it up as we go along. But those are two frameworks that a lot of people find helpful in one way or another. And they are opposite frameworks, but they can give you a place to start. So shout out to a podcast called Shrink the Box, which I will link to in the show notes at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. So in Shrink the Box, one of the hosts is a psychotherapist, and the two people talk about the psychology of fictional characters on TV and in films. And in this little clip, they're talking about Beth Harmon in The Queen's Gambit. Have a listen.
What can we all take from that? As I'm thinking, just listening to you speak, I'm thinking the importance of connection over isolation from human beings has got to be quite high up there. Even just in terms of just getting by in life. Life is challenging for every single human being. Sometimes when I'm feeling low, I sort of rewind and think, well, the last 2 weeks I haven't really spoken to anyone.
Yeah, I mean, we evolved to need other people. If you're on the outskirts of the tribe, that's where you're going to be picked off by predators. So in evolutionary terms, the deeper within the middle of a tribe that you are, the least vulnerable you are. I mean, we all watch the David Attenborough stuff. We are actually not so different. In evolutionary terms, our nervous systems haven't actually moved on that far. So we are going to feel worse the further away from people we are. We all need people, and relationships basically are what are going to save you. But for some people, relationship can be very, very hard to come by for all the reasons we've been talking about. For Beth, relationship meant loss. It meant vulnerability. So she pushed it away. And that's also the ironic thing, is we push away the thing that we most need. We defend against the fear that's going to come with if I engage with people, if I show them my vulnerabilities. And in doing that, we get even deeper into the loneliness that is going to make us feel worse. The thing that's going to save us is the thing we're pushing away.
So the bit that really stood out to me there was the thing that's going to save us is the thing we're pushing away. And I think that's something to reflect on. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to that Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you on board. You can find all the links I've mentioned and a transcript of the episode online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to the podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes. There may be links in this podcast that earn me money. This doesn't come at any extra cost to you if you make a purchase through those links, and it helps to support the podcast. This week, for God's sake. And then, no, cut all of that. That's bollocks. It's easier. And with, yeah.